Get in, nerds. We're comparing Hollow Knight and Silksong. In the last video, we talked about the first hour of Hollow Knight and Silksong, respectively, and the differences weren't that great. I'll link the video up above. One difference I did kind of neglect to mention is that in Hollow Knight, you're just kind of thrown into the world, and it's up to you where to go. In Silksong, it's a little more structured, I want to say, where Hornet's introduced to the world with text that says Act 1 and letting you know that this is going to be divided into sections. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into hours 2 and 3. In hours 2 and 3 of Hollow Knight, one of the things that I did notice was that I had already unlocked the Mantis Claw. I'd also gotten 2 magical abilities such as the Vengeful Spirit and Desolate Dive. Now this is significant because in Silksong, I had only unlocked the Swift Step, and eventually I got the upgrade to the cloak that allows you to float. And while these are good upgrades, there are a lot of places early on in the game where it would be nice to have a wall climb ability at this point. Still, however, Hornet does feel a lot more versatile compared to the Knight, especially with the use of tools. And sort of building on that, let's go ahead and talk about the combat, because I believe the variety of combat abilities is where Hornet really shines versus the Knight. In Silksong, you have multiple crests that will allow you to really customize your wife. In the second hours, I unlocked the Reaper crest, and I know about the Beast crest, but I really couldn't be less interested in that crest because I don't like the way that you heal with that crest, so I just sort of left it and went straight to Greymoor. In Hollow Knight, it's more nail and magic. Instead, there's not a lot of variety there. However, it is worth it to say that by the time that you get all of your abilities and nail upgrades, the Knight is significantly stronger than the beginning of the game. Which brings me to my next point, that upgrades in Hollow Knight versus Silksong are much easier to come by. Already in the first 2 hours of the game, I had gotten my first nail upgrade for the Knight, and similarly, I had already gotten my first full mask. Whereas in Silksong, in the first 2 hours, I had only gotten a single mask shard, and needle upgrades are much harder to come by. I still haven't gotten that yet in my first 3 hours. However, with how crafty you can be with Hornet, I feel like that makes up for it. Another thing worth mentioning is environmental damage in Silksong does 2 mask damage, whereas in Hollow Knight it only did 1. I do believe that this has to do with the amount that the Knight and Hornet respectively heal, but still falling into lava doing 2 mask damage seems a little excessive to me. One of the things that really bothered me in Silksong was the gauntlets. In Hollow Knight there are a few, but not that many, and maybe this is due to the amount of time that I put into Hollow Knight when I first played it. They never seemed over the top to me. In Silksong, the gauntlets seem a bit more ruthless with no reward. In Hollow Knight, you at least got Geo during the gauntlets or after. In Silksong, there are no rewards, especially in the gauntlets that lead up to a boss fight, such as the one with Grohl, where you're fighting enemies and then you do the boss fight. And that boss fight was already particularly hard because you also have to avoid falling into the maggot water. And also, there's usually not a reward for defeating a boss in Silksong, which is a stark contrast from Hollow Knight, because in Hollow Knight you at least got a hefty sum of Geo after defeating a boss. If not that, you got some sort of ability. Like when you beat the Soul Master, you get the deep dive ability. But still, in my opinion, since this is a replay and there's not a lot of recency bias anymore, and I'm going through this without the hype that I had in September when the game released. I still think that Silksong is a better game, but we'll see how I feel whenever we get to hours 4 and 5. If you're new here and you've made it this far, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to continue this series. If you haven't already subscribed or dropped a like, please do so because it really helps out the channel. Also, drop a like if you like, and I will see you next week for the next one.